The first thing she noticed was the silence. Not the quiet kind that comes with peace, but the heavy kind that presses against your ears and makes you feel watched. The old homestead had always been like that, sitting alone beyond the last stretch of dirt road where the wind carried more dust than sound. Folks in town used to say the land remembered things. She never believed that. Not until she came back. Her father had passed in late autumn, just before the first frost settled deep into the soil. He left behind little more than debts, a crumbling house and a patch of land no one wanted, and the well, always the well. It stood a short walk from the house, built of rough stone, its wooden frame leaning just enough to make you uneasy. It had been dry for as long as she could remember. As a child, she had dropped pebbles into it, waiting to hear a splash that never came. But her father had always kept it covered. That was what stayed with her. Even when there was no water, no use for it, he made sure the heavy lid was set tight every evening. If she asked why, he would just say, "Some things ain't meant to be left open." Now he was gone and the land was hers. Not that it felt like much of a gift. Winter was coming fast, the kind that swallowed roads and cut towns off for weeks. Selling the place would take time she did not have, and staying meant facing a season she was not prepared for. Still, something pulled her toward the well. Maybe it was the way the wind seemed to circle it. Maybe it was the memory of her father's quiet warnings. Or maybe it was the simple fact that she had nothing left to lose. The lid was heavier than she expected. It groaned as she pushed it aside, the sound echoing across the empty fields. For a moment she hesitated. The opening below was nothing but darkness, deep and still. Cold air rose from it, sharp and strange, carrying a faint scent she could not place, not water, not earth, something else. She found an old lantern in the shed, the same one her father used during power cuts. The flame flickered weakly at first, then steadied, casting a warm glow against the stone walls. She tied a rope around the support beam above the well, testing it the way she had seen him do years ago. Her hands trembled, though she could not say why. "Just a look," she whispered to herself. The rope creaked as she lowered herself down. The air grew colder with every foot, the light from above shrinking into a pale circle. The stones were damp in places, though there had been no rain for weeks. Her boots scraped against the wall as she descended, careful, slow. Then her foot touched something solid. She expected dirt, dry, packed ground. But this was different, flat, even, man-made. She raised the lantern, her breath catching in her throat as the light spread across the space below. What she saw did not make sense at first. Wooden beams, stacked crates, barrels lined in neat rows, sacks piled high against reinforced walls, everything dry, untouched by time, as if it had been waiting for her. Her father had not left her nothing. He had left her everything she would need to survive a brutal winter. A hidden vault buried beneath a well no one would think to question. Food enough for months, maybe longer. Her heart pounded as she stepped forward, the lantern shaking in her hand. She reached out and touched one of the crates, brushing away a thin layer of dust. It was real. All of it was real. Then she noticed something else. At the far end of the chamber, half hidden in shadow, there was a door. And it was slightly open. The door did not belong there. Everything else in the underground vault made a kind of rough, practical sense. Crates of dried beans, sacks of flour, jars sealed tight with wax, barrels that likely held salted meat or grain. It was the kind of careful planning a man might make if he expected a hard winter or worse times ahead. But that door was different. It stood upright against the far wall, built from thick, dark wood, its surface worn smooth in places like it had been used often. She took a slow step closer, the lantern light trembling across the hinges. Her father had never mentioned anything like this. Not once in all the years she had lived under that roof. Not during the long winters when they sat by the stove and listened to the wind claw at the walls. Not even in his final days when his voice had grown thin and distant. He spoke of weather, of debts, of small things that did not matter, but never this. Her grip tightened around the lantern handle. The air near the door felt colder, sharper somehow, as if it carried a draft from a deeper place. She noticed the floor had marks, faint lines in the dust, like something had been dragged back and forth over time. Not recently, but not forgotten either. She swallowed and glanced back toward the rope hanging from the opening above. The pale light from the surface seemed far away now, like it belonged to another world. For a moment she thought about climbing back up, sealing the well, and pretending none of this existed, but that was not who she was. And it was not what her father would have done. He had built this, hidden it, protected it. There had to be a reason. She moved closer until she stood just a few feet from the door. Up close, she could see small details she had missed before, scratches near the handle. Deep ones, uneven, as if made in a hurry. The wood around the frame was reinforced with iron strips, bolted in place with care that went beyond simple storage. Whatever was behind it mattered. Her heart beat harder now, not from the climb, but from something she could not name. A warning, maybe. Or a memory trying to surface. She reached out slowly, her fingers brushing against the cold metal handle. It felt solid, heavier than it looked. For a second she froze, listening. Nothing, no movement. No sound beyond the faint creak of the rope and the soft flicker of the lantern flame. Still, something felt wrong. Her father had always been careful, but he had also been kind in his own quiet way. He taught her how to mend tools, how to store food, how to read the sky before a storm. He never scared her, never filled her head with wild stories or hidden dangers, so why hide this? Why build a second barrier inside a secret vault? Her hand trembled slightly as she tightened her grip on the handle. She told herself it was just age, just old wood and iron and a man's habit of overbuilding things, nothing more. But the marks on the floor said otherwise. She pulled her hand back for a moment, breathing slowly, trying to steady herself. Her eyes drifted across the vault again, taking in the careful order of it all. The food was arranged with purpose, enough to last through months of snow and isolation, maybe even years if rationed right. It spoke of fear or preparation for something larger than a single winter. And then she remembered something. A night from years ago, when the wind had howled so loud it shook the walls. She had been younger, unable to sleep, and had crept out of bed to find her father. He was not by the stove. Not in the house at all? She had looked out the window and seen a faint light near the well. He had been outside in the middle of that storm, standing alone. At the time, she thought he was checking the cover, making sure it stayed in place. That was the kind of man he was, careful, steady, but now, standing here, she was no longer sure. Maybe he had been doing more than checking. Maybe he had been coming down here. Her gaze returned to the door. The lantern flame flickered suddenly, bending toward it as if pulled by a breath from the other side. A thin line of darkness showed along the edge where it was not fully closed. Not sealed, waiting. This time she did not hesitate as long. Her fingers wrapped around the handle again, colder now, and she slowly began to turn it. The handle turned with a slow, heavy resistance, like it had not been moved in a long time. The sound echoed softly through the underground vault, louder than it should have been. She held her breath without meaning to, every small noise now feeling like it carried weight. The door shifted inward just a fraction. A thin breath of colder air slipped through the gap, brushing against her face. It carried a scent that made her pause. Not rot, not damp earth, something older. Like wood shut away for years, mixed with a faint trace of iron and something she could not quite name. She pushed the door a little further. The lantern light stretched into the narrow opening, revealing a tight passage beyond. The walls were not rough like the well or the storage space. They were lined with fitted planks, reinforced and straight, built with care. This was not an afterthought. This had been planned from the start. Her father had built more than a winter food vault. A quiet unease settled deeper in her chest as she leaned forward, raising the lantern higher. The passage sloped slightly downward, disappearing into shadow. The air felt still, almost too still, like it had not been disturbed in a long time. She stepped back instead of forward. Something in her resisted the idea of going deeper. The vault behind her was already more than she could understand. Food stacked for survival, hidden beneath a dry well that no one questioned. That alone was enough to change everything. She could stay here through the winter, maybe longer. She would not have to depend on anyone. Not the town, not the debts, not the pity she knew would come once people learned how little she had been left. But this passage was something else. This was not about survival alone. Her eyes drifted back to the marks on the floor near the door. They led into the passage, faint but clear now that she knew where to look. Something had been moved through here more than once. Not dragged in a straight line, but guided, careful. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. Her father had secrets, that much was clear now. But the question that settled in her mind was harder to shake. Who else knew? The thought brought the outside world rushing back into her mind, the town, small and quiet, but never blind. People noticed things. They talked. They remembered. Her father had lived there all his life, and though he kept to himself, he was not invisible. Had anyone ever asked about the well? She tried to recall the last time someone had mentioned it. There had been passing comments over the years, jokes about digging for water that never came, a neighbor once offering to help deepen it, which her father refused without much explanation. At the time, it had seemed like pride. Now it felt different, deliberate. Her grip tightened on the lantern again. If he had gone to such lengths to hide this place, then it was not just about keeping it safe from weather or time. It was about keeping it hidden from people. That meant there was something worth hiding. A faint sound pulled her attention back to the passage. She froze. It was small. So small she almost convinced herself she imagined it. A soft shift, like wood settling or something brushing lightly against a surface. It came from deeper inside, beyond where the lantern light could reach. Her heart began to pound again, harder now. She stood still, listening. Nothing followed. The silence returned, thick and pressing, as if swallowing the sound before it could grow. She took a slow step forward, then stopped again at the threshold. The edge of the doorframe felt like a line she was not ready to cross. Not yet. Instead, she turned back toward the vault, letting the familiar sight of the stored food steady her. This part she understood. Preparation, survival, a man doing what he could with what little he had. But the passage behind that door did not fit that picture. It opened up questions she was not sure she wanted answered. Her father had spent years building this place, quietly, without drawing attention. That meant he had time, purpose, and likely help, even if she had never seen it. She thought of the long days he worked alone, the nights he stayed awake longer than he needed to. The way he sometimes looked toward the well, not with worry, but with something closer to concern. Not for the structure, for what lay beneath it. The lantern flickered again, and for a brief moment, the shadows inside the passage seemed to shift in a way that made her step back. She told herself it was just the light, just the air moving. But her instinct said otherwise. She moved to the door and pushed it slightly closed, leaving only a narrow gap, enough to remind her it was there. Not enough to see inside. For now, that felt like the only choice she could make. Because whatever waited beyond that passage was not just part of her father's past. It was about to become part of hers. She did not sleep much that night. The house felt different now, as if the ground beneath it held a secret too large to ignore. Every creak of wood, every whisper of wind against the walls seemed tied to what she had seen below. The winter food vault should have brought comfort. It meant safety, warmth, survival through the harsh months ahead. But the hidden passage behind that door had changed everything. By morning, the sky had turned a dull gray. Snow clouds gathered low, heavy with promise. Winter was arriving faster than expected. She stepped outside, her boots crunching against the thin layer of frost. The well stood where it always had, quiet and still, giving no sign of what lay beneath. She walked around it slowly, studying the stonework in a way she never had before. It was stronger than it needed to be for a dry well, reinforced, meant to last, meant to protect something. A distant sound made her pause, wheels, faint, but growing closer along the dirt road. Her chest tightened. No one came out here without reason. She moved toward the edge of the property, keeping low behind the old fence line. Through the bare trees she spotted a wagon making its way up the path. Two figures sat at the front, bundled against the cold. Even from a distance, she could tell they were not just passing through. They were coming here. A cold realization settled in. Someone new. She stepped back quickly, her mind racing. The vault. The passage, the marks on the floor. Her father's careful secrecy. It all pointed to one thing now. This place had not been forgotten. It had been watched. The wagon slowed as it approached the house. She did not wait to see more. Turning, she hurried back toward the well, her breath quick, her thoughts sharper than they had been in years. If those men knew about the hidden food storage, they would search the house first. They would not stop until they found something. And if they found the well uncovered, it would be over. She reached it and grabbed the heavy lid, dragging it back into place with more force than she thought she had. The wood thudded shut, sealing the darkness below. For a second she stood there, hands resting on the rough surface, trying to steady herself. Then she made a choice. She lifted the lid again. This time there was no hesitation. If the danger was above ground, then the only safe place left was below. She tied the rope quickly, her fingers moving with urgency now. The distant voices carried faintly on the wind. The men had arrived. She could hear the wagon stop, the creak of wood, the murmur of low conversation. No time left. She lowered herself into the well, faster than before, the cold air rushing past her as she descended. The lantern light danced against the stone walls, shadows stretching and shrinking with each movement. Her boots hit the floor harder than she intended, but she did not stop. She moved straight for the vault. The door to the passage stood just as she had left it, slightly open, waiting. The faint draft brushed against her again, colder now, sharper, as if aware of her return. Above her, a muffled sound echoed down the well. Footsteps. They were inside the house. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She slipped into the vault, pulling the door behind her just enough to hide the light. The space that had felt like a blessing now felt like a fragile shelter. The stacked crates and barrels stood silent, offering no answers. Another sound came from above, closer this time. A heavy step near the well opening. They were checking outside. Her eyes moved to the passage again. There was nowhere else to go. If they opened the well, they would see the rope. They would find the vault. And then whatever her father had tried to protect would be in their hands. Her breathing slowed, not from calm, but from focus. She stepped toward the door. The lantern flickered as she pushed it wider, revealing more of the narrow corridor beyond. The air that flowed out felt alive in a way she could not explain. Not dangerous in a clear way, but not empty either. Behind her, the faint scrape of wood sounded from above. The well cover, they were moving it. She did not look back. Tightening her grip on the lantern, she stepped across the threshold and into the passage her father had kept hidden for so many years. Whatever lay ahead, whatever truth waited in the dark, it was her only path now. And somewhere deep inside, past the fear and the cold, a quiet thought began to rise. Maybe her father had not just hidden something. Maybe he had left her a way out. The passage narrowed as she moved forward, the lantern casting long, uneasy shadows along the wooden walls. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from distance, but from the weight of what she might find. Behind her, faint sounds echoed down from the well, muffled voices, the scrape of boots. The men were searching. She kept going. The air shifted as the passage sloped deeper, growing less sharp, more settled. After a few more steps, the corridor opened into a second chamber. Smaller than the winter food vault, but built with the same care. The walls here were lined with shelves, though not filled with food, books, old, worn, carefully stacked books. Ledgers, journals, bundles of papers tied with string. A small wooden table stood in the center, and on it rested a single oil lamp long unused. She stepped closer, her breath slowing as a different kind of understanding began to take shape. This was not just a hidden storage space. This was a record. She set her lantern down and reached for one of the journals. The cover was rough, edges softened by time. When she opened it, she recognized the handwriting immediately. Her father's, careful, steady, the same way he wrote labels on crates or notes by the stove. The first few pages spoke of simple things: weather patterns, crop yields, supplies stored and rotated through the seasons, but as she turned further, the entries changed. They spoke of the land, of winters that had come too early, of years when roads vanished under snow for weeks at a time, of neighbors who struggled, who lost more than they could afford. He wrote about helping quietly, leaving sacks of grain where they would be found, never taking credit. Her throat tightened. He had not been hoarding. He had been preparing. She turned more pages, faster now. There were notes about the well, about building beneath it, not for secrecy alone, but for protection. A place where food would stay safe from storms, from animals, from desperate hands that might take everything in one night. And then there were other entries. Mentions of men. Travelers at first, then names crossed out. Warnings written in sharper strokes. He had noticed strangers asking questions in town, showing interest in land that held no obvious value. People who saw the coming winters not as something to survive, but as something to profit from. Her hands trembled slightly as she read. The men above were not visitors. They had been looking for this place. A sound from the passage made her look up. Footsteps, closer now, echoing faintly through the wood and stone. They had found the way down. Her eyes moved quickly across the room until they landed on something she had not noticed before. At the far end, behind the table, there was another door. Smaller, almost hidden within the wall itself. She moved toward it, her heart racing again. The latch opened easily. Beyond it, a narrow staircase led upward. Cold air drifted down, but not the still, trapped kind from the well. This air moved, carrying the scent of pine and open space. An exit, understanding hit her all at once. Her father had not just built a hidden food vault. He had built a way through it. A way to protect what mattered and a way to leave if it was ever threatened. The footsteps behind her grew louder. No more time. She grabbed the journal, hesitated for a brief second, then took two more from the shelf. The truth mattered. His story mattered. Then she picked up the lantern and moved toward the staircase. Each step upward felt like stepping out of the past and into something new. When she pushed the top open, fresh daylight spilled in. She climbed out into a small clearing hidden behind a line of trees she barely recognized from the house. The land stretched wide and quiet, the first real snow beginning to fall. For a moment she just stood there, breathing. Behind her, far off now, faint voices carried through the ground. The men would find the vault, the supplies, maybe even the passage, but they would not find her. And they would not understand what they had taken. She looked down at the journals in her hands, then back toward the hidden well that had changed everything. Her father had left her more than food for winter. He had left her a purpose. A way to protect, to prepare, to carry forward something bigger than survival alone. The wind picked up, light snow brushing against her coat as she started walking away from the clearing. Not running, not hiding, just moving forward with steady steps. There would be hard days ahead. The winter would not be easy, but she was no longer unprepared and no longer alone in what she carried. Somewhere along the way, she realized the silence she had felt when she first arrived was gone. In its place was something quieter but stronger, a sense that the land did remember. And now, so did she.